Welcome to the Redacted Culture Cast, where we engage in conversations on both gun culture and what we're calling the philosophy of violence. Which, if we want to be very clear on that, the philosophy of violence is not necessarily a philosophy which advocates for violence, but how do we understand this subject, which seems to be a part of life in this world. So today I'm joined by a guest who I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Spoiler alert, we have had a little bit of a talk before, so if we have to reference that, we'll do our best to bring it forward. But would you introduce yourself?
Sure. Adam with TacSwap. I am TacSwap.Adam on the website marketplace. Happy to be here. I appreciate what you're doing for us.
Thank you very much, Adam. So for those who are listening, you know that the show has been completely supported by you folks, the listeners. So if you want to keep the show rolling, please head over to redactedllc.com. That's where you'll find our merch. The store closes on the 16th, which is a Friday. It'll probably close somewhere earlier in the day. And then we'll open in 2023 with a new stock lineup or a couple of new features for you to find. So without further ado, Adam, so I called you, or you called, we basically did the digital introduction because I wanted to have a conversation with you guys. There's always going to be some hubbub in the air, but I wanted to talk to you because of a couple of reasons specifically. One of them being, we exist in a world where marketplaces have value. We exist in this. The world is changing. The time is going forward. We still haven't hit Cyberpunk 2077. So like, TacSwap has been I think it's played a very kind of not pivotal role, but it's had a substantial role in especially one of the elements of how gun culture is changing. In my opinion, and what I've seen over the years, is that we have had websites and maybe like digital spaces where communities will gather around there to exchange goods and try to figure out how to talk to each other. There's a certain romanticism hidden deep within gun culture that has this idea of like bartering and trading, and I know people who are really good at it, and I'm not one of them, who they just know how to find everything. And so a friend of mine introduced me to TacSwap a number of years ago, and you guys were pivotal or very important, or a key part in how I was able to like become night vision capable. And so so TacSwap as a whole, how did you guys get started? When did that become a thing? Because
sure. Sorry, Forrest. So it's a good intro to the conversation, because I think we're going to talk about a lot of the history and kind of how tech has come, what it means to the marketplace. And TacSwap was actually founded by Paul. I know a lot of people probably know Paul on Instagram, and just like any other of the big tech companies, they got the site got deplatformed for selling scary items. And from there, one of the users, I was actually one of the first. I was probably, I would say, first couple hundred users that Paul had on Instagram himself. And once they got deplatformed, one of the other users, Joe, had reached out to Paul, and Joe's a software developer. I think if anybody knows the history or has been getting our emails, it's Joe and I now. But Joe actually, software developer, super smart dude. He went and really rebuilt the platform offline from the actual Instagram feed. And that was kind of V1, right, of TacSwap, to where Paul didn't have to take pictures anymore and load them into his IG account. It became its own site, and from there they started really rolling. They didn't spend a lot of time on feature functionality, but they were just really focused on keeping the community together. So
you're telling me TacSwap started as just a generic like an Instagram page?
Yeah, that's correct.
Oh,
and I think there may be even a little more backstory with Paul on Facebook, but I know the big following really got started on Instagram, and it was deplatformed, right? And I think that'll carry into a lot of our conversation, I think and hope today. But from there, I've spent about 20 years in technology. We're building big e-commerce platforms, loyalty platforms for retail and all kinds of different industries. And I kind of watched the site after it got taken off IG, and just kind of waited for improvements, feature functionality. I saw the opportunity, right? I saw the marketplace opportunity. I was mad at work one day, probably mad at boss or something in tech, whatever, and I just shot Paul a note, saying, hey, I'd love to get into it, I'd love to get involved in this. Let me know what you think. After a few conversations, him and Joe, we talked it out, and I jumped jumped on board to bring my experience from a product, product and software perspective, and marketplace perspective into the group. So for quite a while, is Paul and Joe and I. Joe, doing the brains behind the operation, the person on keyboard, and me kind of laying out the product vision to try to get this thing. From there, we entered into kind of a V2, which was we updated the end of 2020, and that really just allowed us to keep the site rolling from just a product, and we had some technology that was being sunsetted that we were leveraging, just making sure the site was staying up. And we had, just like any other company, we had vision, right? We had plans, what we wanted to do, but we're working full time, right? So what we can do is limited. We really took the next 2 years from 2020 till present to really lay out the vision and strategy that we wanted to accomplish on the site. So I'll pause there for us and see if you got any questions before we, I'd love to jump into tech. I won't spend too much time deep in the tech, but there's reasons that changes occur in tech that we should talk about too, because that's important to the marketplace.
No, I think tech has it. Like, tech is one of those things where it sometimes could be treated a little bit like wizardry, like, oh, the algorithm, or oh, big tech censorship, or oh, they're doing this, right? So like, even what's going on with Elon Musk and Twitter right now is that it's rather obvious, and it's actually the receipts are being printed and shown that at least within the staff of Twitter, there was deliberate, human, intentional, objective censorship being done against political opponents. So at this point in time, you cannot deny that the staff, the people paid by Twitter's payroll, were deliberately targeting key conservative pages or profiles and then limiting their reach. And then what they're doing about it is they were lying about it to Congress because they were just switching synonyms for synonyms. And it's like, okay, fine. But so when that comes to tech, especially tech and gun culture, we know that we are a bit, in the sense, up against the wall. We know that the system, let's be generic, let's be a little Equilibrium the movie, the system is definitely against us, in the sense that Mike Glover gets removed from Shopify. If you try to even sell gun-related stuff on social media, you're putting your entire profile at risk. You can see different key players like John Lovell of Warrior Poet Society talking about censorship, or you got people who've been around here for a long time, like Iraq Veteran 8888, who's like, they all, on all of these different platforms, you got Instagram, you got Twitter, you got YouTube, you got this, that, and the other, all of them are dealing with different forms of censorship. But when it comes specifically to marketplaces and banks, there is already an extra level of oversight, is not the right word, management, manipulation. What do you call it? Like, if you're coming from a tech side where you get to see what part is human and what part is computer, and you get to see from the marketplace of what part is organic, Adam Smith, what part is manipulation, how much of what is affecting gun culture is caused by ourselves, and how much of it is being caused by outside parties?
It's heavily influenced by outside parties, and I think if I use the word, it's ignorance, right? And I think it's just a lot of ignorance around the industry itself and what we do as a culture and a group, right? And I think
ignorance in what? Like, give me an example of that.
Yeah, and who actually, who the industry is, who what we actually do and what we contribute, right? And I think all we see is what's on the media. All we see is mass murders with firearms, right? And I think that's the general ignorance around it, is that if you look at the stats on how many actual gun owners are in America and how many firearms have been purchased, to think that there's a massive problem with the gun community itself is ignorance. 60, I don't know what the numbers are now. I probably should have pulled them, but there's 63 plus million gun owners. And I mean, that number's went up astronomically since 2020. 300, 400 million firearms, and they believe in circulation in the US, right? It's just I've seen, the little memes and stuff, but if there was a problem with that, then I think it'd be much larger. From if it's every one of us running around, shooting people and doing these things that I think people think that, myself, like if I present that I'm a firearms enthusiast, to my day job, there's an immediate stigma put on that, right? There's an immediate, I'm a far right wing, I'm a crazy guy. I'm gonna, I have a mentality of going and doing, some harm to someone else.
Yeah, your Friday
Without,
night is set yelling at clouds on the porch, drinking Natty Light with a shotgun kind of thing.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, the stigma definitely, I mean, there are people who have that opinion, and it is unfortunate, and it's just in some ways I don't know if they can be helped. It may be a little bit.
It's spending enough time in with California companies. I've worked with the Googles and the PayPals and the
Okay.
Apples, and I haven't worked for them. I've worked with them in different projects, and that stuff's all true. It's just there is an absolute political lean. There's an absolute just judgment towards the industry, right? Before people have ever interacted with the community or even picked up a firearm or been interested in what the industry is all about. I think that's where the ignorance comes into me.
I have a bit of an ethical problem with ignorance. Is that I think when we're looking at like gun culture, gun control, opposition to gun culture, like one, gun culture is mostly descriptive. It's not a thing that we say that gun culture does this. Even though we might use that language, we're trying to spend more time describing a thing as opposed to prescribing it. For example, we can say that gun owners on average own an AR-15, right? But it isn't because you're a gun owner, you're going to buy an AR-15. It's not it doesn't prescriptive versus descriptive concepts are like amazingly not recognized commonly in colloquial conversation. So I'm a part of gun culture means that there are these stereotypes or these sort of regularities, right? I'm wearing Vans and jeans and a black t-shirt right now. That's kind of the look. It definitely is kind of the trend right now, which is fine because, it works for me. But there are other things that go into it, like the gray man trend or the trying to blend in trend or the interest in penetration testing that doesn't need to be sexual. We're talking about like digital kind of stuff, or the interest in lock picking or all of these kind of things, right? And I think I have an ethical question with this idea of ignorance because at some point in time, that ignorance is no longer naivety, it's something else. It's something else. Like at some point in time, how can you continue to be ignorant of something like this? Like you shouldn't regulate something that you don't understand.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I wouldn't say unfortunately. I think it is up to us, up to the people that are in the community to continue to educate and to continue to grab people and pull them to the range and to pull them into a gun shop and to get their, I got neighbors, I'm teaching their kids to shoot, right? Like they've never shot, right? We're in the suburbs. Like, I've got an opportunity to teach some kids that this isn't what you hear and see. And then then the parents get involved, right? And I think I grew up, so my dad has spent 30 years educating through 4-H shooting sports, through Indiana Hunter Education Association. That's how I grew up, right? Now my dad, he probably has more firearms than I do, but he doesn't own an AR, right? So back to your example, right? His love is black powder. He likes the old flintlock stuff. He goes to black powder shoots multiple times every year. But he loves when we go shoot together because he gets to learn about some of the modern stuff, right? And I don't mess around with that stuff, but we still do that. So I think when we're mixing now these cultures of the AR and the younger generation of gun culture and my dad's generation where it was about hunting and skeet shooting and trap shooting and it's a very interesting blend, and I'm fortunate enough to kind of be in that generation in the middle where when I was growing up, we didn't have a computer in the house, right? We didn't have the internet. We had a VCR like my senior year in high school, and my dad bought on a garage sale, right? Like we were country people, and guns were just part of our culture because it's how that we fed the family. I think back to the culture, right, that's changing, right? There's an interest in firearms. It's something pulling some of the younger generation into this culture now, and I think there's this there's this big gap in education between my dad's generation, where it was all about teaching and it was all about learning how to properly handle a firearm, and now it's about, hey, like, let's grab some night vision and let's go out, or let's, hey, what's this new stuff, what's this new AR, or what are these new tactical kit that's everybody's talking about. I think these generations are starting to, there's this big gap in between them, and it's coming together, and we've got to, my generation specifically have got to bridge that gap, right? And I'm doing it through tech, right?
Okay.
Because that's my background. But I also try to pull everybody out to the ranges to make sure we get people involved in actually putting a finger on a trigger and making sure that people understand safety.
Because we've commented on that generational gap or that generational shift before, and in some ways, gun culture has terms for things. You get your FUDs and you get your Zoomers and you get your yada yada yada. But one thing so you say you kind of see yourself as being a man in the middle, because I got to look back and see, I personally got to look back and say my father and my grandfather were very big on hunting, and most of if you look at the family gun safe that my grandfather had the gun safe he had when he was living where he was, it was hunting rifles and hunting shotguns, and there was everything that he had. He didn't even have like an M1 Garand, and he fought in World War II and Korea. And so he was very intimate with the M1 Garand, but he didn't even have one. It would be like me not having an AR-15, despite the fact that I was in Ranger Battalion. And so, so there were certain great values that I saw from my father and my grandfather's generation, but that's not the same thing as the challenge that because us younger folks, I mean, I'm in my 30s, so I'm only so young, but a lot of us have experienced this idea of like the older generation is suspicious of the younger generation. Like, why are you moving and shooting? And why are you carrying that ugly black gun? And why is it made out of plastic? And why are you wearing armor? And all blah, 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 blah. It's like, it's not practical. It's like, it's night vision and suppressors is cool. It doesn't need to be
fun.
practical.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think to me, it goes both ways, right? I'll talk upstream and downstream. Like, it's my responsibility to bring my dad down and understand that, right? And hey, like, he shot a suppressor for the first time, and my dad, 40 years of farming, he's got massive hearing problems, right? And shooting for a long time around all these kids, lines and 25 kids shooting at, he's not done his job protecting his hearing. He shot a suppressor for the first time and he was blown away. I mean, just where has this been, right? Like, what, and he talks about, having all those kids or having all those people on his, shooting lines over the years training, and being able to, if that would have been an option, without going through all the legalities and, more mass appeal to it at that time, how different he could have taught and trained, right? And so, bringing him into that world and teaching him about, hey, here's why this stuff's important. It's not because it's some cool thing that, all the kids are doing. There's actually purpose to it. There's actually a reason that we're doing it. So, to me, it's like, I gotta educate him too. I gotta keep him, shooting some of that new stuff because it keeps him interested. It keeps some of his conversations fresh with, the kids he's teaching in 4-H, and he can speak that language a little bit more. So, we're bridging that gap upstream. I think just like they're trying there, and I hope they're trying to bridge it downstream as well.
And when you say upstream, you're saying like upstream to like my father, downstream to us. Okay.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, no, that makes sense, especially in it's just like when you look at gun culture as a whole, despite the fact that we have a little bit of division between age gaps, as a whole, we're pretty decent at passing things down. Like it kind of works its way through. There is a lot of room for criticism, but at the end of the day, too, like we can work through this. Like
that's right. Well, safety is still safety, right? Education is still education.
Yeah,
right? It's the history of firearms. Chris Kyle's book, the American Gun, is just an amazing. If people haven't read that, that's listening to this podcast, go get that, right? Because it's just an amazing history on the firearm in the United States and how we've got to the AR, right, and how we've got to Glocks, et cetera. It's a really good read, and I think it's a good education for people to understand kind of how things evolved to where they're at today.
Well, that's another one to add to the bookshelf. Unfortunately, I don't think I have read that one.
You have not? Yeah, you definitely picked that one up.
Because I've got my lists, but gun culture. One of the things that I hope that we start to continue to see more in our lifetime are more Karl von Clausewitz's and more a little bit more of that attention to how we think about things. And in some ways, that's exactly why why this podcast was started. So thank you for coming on. So I want to make sure that I'm going to pull us back a little bit to talking about tech and the marketplace and how you see gun culture in that regards, because you said something earlier and you said, and I'm going to paraphrase because I want to make sure I got you right. It's our responsibility to educate. And then you told a story about you're educating people that you could say are already in gun culture. So like, other people, like our own kids or something like that. But then there's also this implication of people outside of gun culture. And when you say responsibility, like part of me reacts to that and says, it's not my responsibility to educate you if you refuse to learn. Like there are certain people outside of gun culture that I don't care. There's no reaching them kind of thing. And so why is it my responsibility? Why is it my responsibility? But at the same time, there's more to it. Like, are you saying that, is it the responsibility of gun culture as in it's an ethical onus on them? There's an ethical implication that you are sort of called to educate, almost like a missionary in a sense? Or are you saying that if we do not continue the effort of expanding gun culture, we will disappear? Which one are those two things in contrast with each other?
No, I think it's much more the latter. I think we have a responsibility for those that will listen and allow us to have our voices heard, to educate them, right, and make sure that we are, as the gun culture, the ones that are in it, speaking up, having a voice, not letting the minority voices always have the microphone, right? You're absolutely. There's people we're never going to get through, right? That's fine. That's normal industry, politics stuff. But I think the people that are willing to listen are the people, when you have an opportunity to talk to them, that they're open and listening. I don't think we should shy away from those conversations. And I think a lot of times we don't want to go there, right? Or we just want to stay in our little circle. And I think it's, if we will, I'm very happy about where the culture is at today. And I think the internet's helped that, right? Because I think it's brought some things forward to the younger generation that wouldn't necessarily be there, just even if it's just looking at pictures on IG, right? Just there's still a gun culture out there. Because I think if you listen to certain outlets and certain people they're just gone, right? You shouldn't be a part of that kind of a thing.
You should be a part of what thing? It's gone. You shouldn't be a part of the thing. It is saying that gun culture is over, and anyone who's holding on to it is just holding on to dry bones.
Yeah, they're extremist, right? You're crazy if you do that kind of stuff, right? I do think it's our responsibility that those will listen, as will give us the opportunity to talk and teach. We should be talking to them. We should be teaching them, and we should be teaching them what it's about and what the culture is about. And it's not about a lot of the things that they hear.
Okay. Apparently somebody decided to call me, which is very kind of them. But hey, it is what it is. So let's not get lost. The culture. Okay, so there are antagonists outside of gun culture who paint gun culture as extremists. We know this. It's not necessarily old news, but I think it's something that could use a little bit of refining. One of the ways that I think about it, and one of the issues that I have with both what you'd call like Republicans or conservative politics in America, as well as gun culture, is we oftentimes allow our opposition to define the terms of the conversation. Like, if someone calls you an extremist, what is your response, kind of thing? We in gun culture, at least I myself, occasionally engage in thought experiments on how I would respond to certain accusations. And I was thinking about it in the sense of like, how would I respond if somebody showed up at my door and accused me of being an extremist because of something I posted on the internet. You posted a video of you shooting a gun on this road, or you did a skydiving. I'm not skydiving yet, but you did something, and it was interpreted as dog whistling to some sort of terrorist attack, and blah 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 blah. This kind of idea, right? And my thought was, well, unfortunately, dude, I don't care what you think. Like, I'm not behooven to the whims of your pathetic fancy. So if you're going to, you know what I mean? Like, if someone's gonna call me an extremist, right, for doing what I do within gun culture, part of me goes, well, why would you think something like that? Like, why would you think I'm an extremist? I'm not Tim Pool, the milquetoast fence sitter of politics. No, I definitely hold my positions. But like, what good does that language do? If I call somebody an extremist, that means there's nothing that I can do to have a conversation with them. There's nothing I can do. There's no point in so what I'm doing is I'm boxing them into a corner. But if I get called an extremist by somebody, do I really concern myself in any way forward or any way going forward with their opinions? The idea would be no. It's no longer a conversation. Now it's a strategy game. Now it's a shell game of moving the parts so that I don't need to worry about your opinion having any impact on my life. And so I think a lot of gun culture, like here's another good example, is that we know in American politics, there's an element of the American left that likes to accuse the right or gun culture of being racist. And so gun culture seems to try to bend itself over backwards at times to pander to various minorities to try to keep us all in together. That's the worst way of saying it. And a better way of saying it is when we have like a diverse community event or whatever, we're like extra loud about that diversity. Even though it's like, if you're going to take gun culture, nobody in gun culture cares. Nobody in gun. It's the same thing as the military. It's not about race, dude. It's not about race. Like, yeah. And so when we're accused of being, if you gave people of color or black people guns, they would institute gun control right away, because it's like, no, dude, you're disqualified. I don't want to listen to you anymore. There's nothing valuable you have to say. And the point of this whole conversation, this whole statement, is that like, while we're engaging in intellectual practice, we need to be careful not to allow the opposition, which is coming with a disingenuous argument, to be the constant defining element of what we talk about.
Yeah, I couldn't agree. I agree with you, Forrest. I think the good news is on that front is minorities and women, I think, are the fastest growing populations in gun ownership, right? So that's a great thing for the industry overall. That noise that's created around those events is everywhere, right? It is, and I can speak because I work, outside of the industry and, for day jobs and with other things. And it's, everybody amplifies those events, right? It's just a thing now. I think it's just, it continues to drive, it's a good conversation, right? We need as many people in. I don't care if you're black, red, white, male, female, etc. I just want you to be part of the culture so we can teach you, about what we're doing and what we're about as a group. Because I think, going back to us and, some of the feelings of race, I think what I see our culture being is some of the nicest, most, people at the front lines trying to help people when, disasters strike, or, when neighbor tree falls down, somebody in the community needs something. We are the first to show up. Now, we're not showing up with an AR on our back or anything like that, but that's in our nature, I think, is to actually, help people. Most of the people I know that are that way. So I think the more we do in the communities and talk to people and show people I think our true nature, not that it's a extremist, right? That we actually are good people in general. I do believe that about the community. I don't find very many people in the community that are just not good people at the end of the day. That's sure what people want to paint of us, but I think it just goes back to that constant conversation and, be who you are, right? I mean, if you're a good person, get out there and be that person, right? Don't shy. And I think back to your comment about, I do the same thing. I play out these situations. If somebody approached me about this, hey, if somebody's going to call me up about, the site and say, you can't work for me anymore because you're doing this thing on the side. I welcome that conversation, right? Because I'm pretty comfortable with who I am at the end of the day. I know what my beliefs are. I know that I'm not doing this for malicious. I don't have firearms for, illegal or malicious reasons. And I like data, right? I'm a part of it's my techie, but I'm just an analytical person by nature, right? I want to dive into data, right? So when I'm confronted with that conversation, I always want to have the data ready. I want to have the conversation about, firearm related accidents and how much education helps those things, not about just not having a firearm, right? Just not allowing us to actually access the tools that keep our families safe, right? That access the tools that make me feel like I can protect my family, and and I enjoy the hobby, right? I enjoy shooting, 5.56 out to 500 meters, right? I enjoyed the competition and the challenge of improving myself, through a hobby.
Yeah, absolutely. There's an element within, I think, America. We've made this observation a couple times before, so I'll be brief on it. Um, the macrocosm of America, the microcosm of gun culture, and the even more microcosm of the individual are all seeming to be struggling with the same thing. It's not the how, but the why. What am I aiming at? What is my goal? And so you see this in American culture as a whole with this crisis of meaning, and it's most exemplified in young men. But then you look at gun culture specifically, and there's a challenge within gun culture because of we have to try to figure out what is the direction that we're going. What is our objective? What is our goal? And some of that is easier to define, like we want to make sure that our right to bear arms is further enshrined in the legal system. We want to make sure that the attempts to infringe on that are stopped and reversed. These are kind of legal and government based, but then we go into culture ones, is that like we want to have more space and opportunity, more grounds for communication, more time with people, more tribes and groups and cliques and events and all this. We want just more of all these things. And then you run into the individual, and the individual has to deal with like, why am I buying this gun? Well, it's in reality, it's just because it looks cool or I saw it in a video game, but I'm going to come up with an argument saying it's practical for when this happens and blah, blah, blah. And so all of this struggles with the question of what for. And when we had our conversation yesterday, we started talking about the what for of TacSwap as a website, and that what for was also ingrained in the context of everywhere you go in American digital and Western digital media and banks and governments, gun culture is not exclusively but heavily regulated, if not heavily censored in some senses, or it has to deal with, because the word censorship is not quite the accurate subject. I think you could say that it is persecuted is if you want to be a little bit flavorful with it, but it's singled out for being something and then not given the same standard treatment as everybody else. So in other words, Shopify deplatforms Mike Glover for creating a disaster preparedness group. It calls it a militia. Well, I hate to break it to you, but militia is in the Constitution, not social media site or bank. But we've allowed the banks to run the Congress or the whatever, you know what I mean? Like it's kind of this jumbled series of arguments. And so TacSwap, from a mechanism, was from the outside looking in, I saw TacSwap as a place I could go to engage in the marketplace with like-minded people that weren't trying to sell me an overpriced 870 because I know what I got, son. Or and had a bit of the community had some sort of like a self-regulation. Like there was a standard operating procedure. You made an exchange. As soon as you received the product, you left a review. That was it, but for you guys are a little bit more on the side of like starting it. And you're trying to create something in a world where you have top-down pressure, which is big tech censorship, costs of business, trying to run a thing, and bottom-up pressure, which is the expectations of the community. And for you to sit right in the middle of those two is a position that I've never been in. So tell me about that.
Yeah, I think I'll hit on kind of the top down first, right? And I think this is probably the most important thing. What we hit on from a tech perspective is the deplatforming, right? There was local small business firearm shops that got deplatformed yesterday, right? I mean, and I think you're going to post this in a couple of days, but a company called Podium actually deplatformed a bunch of local gun shops, right? And they did in-app messaging for gun shops, and without any notice, they were just told all their customers, "You're off the platform," right? And it's just this is going to continue. And I think the important part of someplace like TacSwap is we are, Joe and I are trying to keep this thing, under our control, right? And not allow, watch the tech that we use. So we minimize the risk of ourselves being deplatformed, right? We have to still leverage third party tech, right? Not everything that we build is ours, right? So like our messaging platform is actually provided by a third party provider, but we leverage their tech, right? But we have to be very careful on how we leverage it, how are those communications with that company. So when, they don't dive in too much, because we risk at any time ourselves being, deplatformed. But the more we own from a marketplace perspective, the more we control the ability to keep that marketplace up and running and provide the service that we're trying to for the community. If we go to Shopify, right? Glover's the most recent example, but if you go back to 2018, they took all the shops off there. I think there was like 12 or 15 big shops that got deplatformed off of Shopify in 2018. You could have been selling a t-shirt with a gun on it. You could have been selling firearm parts, accessories. So this is not stopping, right? It was 2018 up until yesterday, right? And it's not going to end. And unfortunately, these are private companies, right? And that's where we're all sitting behind now, is that it's a private company. I can buy and sell what I want to. What's not present in our industry enough is people that have and own the control of our own sites, right? And I think people don't understand and respect the cost that goes into the sites. I think it's not just ours, right? It's every any gun site, anybody that's running their own website like a Noveski or a Lucky Gunner or Ready Gunner to TacSwap. There's an immense amount of cost, and it's not just time. It's third party tech fees. You just don't write all that code anymore yourself. As much as we'd like to keep that control, it's just not the way it is. And tech is expensive. It's expensive to build. It's expensive to keep up, and it's even more expensive to actually build upon. And I think people don't understand it, right? Because the Instagrams and the Facebooks of the world have made everybody feel like all this technology is free, right? The difference. Go ahead.
There's a point to being said there, is that when we have a new iPhone every year, and when so many of these things that we use have updates, right? I have a PlayStation 4 still. I haven't gotten bougie enough and gotten a PlayStation 5. But even when I'm, but my PlayStation still has an update once a week or once a month or whatever, and that's all free. But I don't see behind the veil at what kind of work goes into that. And so before we get too far into this, we talked about earlier that it's kind of the responsibility of gun culture to focus on continuing education outwards, right? It's a little bit of outreach. But what about when it comes to tech? Because if I exist within gun culture, I exist within the philosophy and the rights of it. I think of the ethical conundrum between when does a bar fight become violence and all this other kind of stuff, right? And so it's my responsibility, if I have children, to pass that on to my kids, or to be able to represent that well. Does tech also have that responsibility going outwards? Because in the one sense, they want to hide behind the wall of I could see it in the one sense, I could be suspicious of tech hiding behind the wall when I don't understand what's going on there. In the same way that tech could be looking at gun culture, thinking that gun culture is hiding behind the wall because they don't know what's going on. Do you see the comparison I'm trying to make?
I do. I do. And I think it's.
Is it a good comparison or is it a bad one?
It's a tough comparison, right? Because I think the tech got so, sorry, Forrest, I'm trying to figure out how to kind of lay that out. The industry got beat to the punch, right? We got so far behind. We got so deplatformed so fast when I think tech was on this skyrocket, right? And I think I think that once that snowball started in tech about the industry, about us being behind the wall, it was hard to stop, right? And I think that snowball just went through the tech industry so fast. There was no one in a position that I saw, gun broker, maybe, and maybe arms list but we were still so behind the wall at that point in time. I don't think that some of that younger generation had gotten involved in the gun culture at that point in time. I think
Okay.
that this is where this gap existed, right? And I think that snowball just became so big so fast in tech. There was nobody to step in front of it. And
Okay.
I think now it's like, oh, and after the release last week, I've had a lot of guys, hey, I'm in tech, I'm happy to help out. So like, there's people out there in tech that are in the culture, right? And it's nice to hear and nice to see, and I think that's encouraging to me. I think now, the longer we wait, though, as an industry to get back, put ourselves in that forefront and take some of this control into our own hands, the more risk we run of more deplatforming, right?
Can you give me an example of what you mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, let's talk Reddit, right? Because Reddit's the one that's fascinating to me. I don't. I'm a techie, but I don't play around on a lot of this stuff for a lot of reasons, and it's probably because I've been so close to the industry for so long, and I know a lot of the crap that goes on behind the scenes, right? And it's Reddit's great forum, right? And their policy right now is you can pretty much talk about anything all the time, right? Yeah, like, they're pretty loose on the First Amendment stuff, right? They allow the goods and services to be, the firearm goods and services to be sold, right? They're allowing some of that stuff, right? So that's cool. That's cool until Facebook or Google or somebody decides to buy them, right? And then guess what? There's no more of us, right? There's no more any firearm people on Reddit, right? So,
Well,
and I think this is where the risk lines out.
let's also make a point there. Reddit is I don't use Reddit very much for a couple of I it's never been the platform that I got invested in. Which I probably need to fix. You criticize me for being a rube. Not a Rube Goldberg machine though. But so the challenge with Reddit though is I understand that they allow a little bit of a marketplace on their website, but you know what they don't allow? Political speech. Unless you're a far left, you're not allowed to have an opinion on that platform, which
Right.
is interesting because the moderators of r/poll or their politics page are like, their bias is so clear that if they can't see it, then they're so close to the anthill, they might as well be an ant. But yet they allow yet they're looser when it comes to the legal exchange of guns. Okay. Do you think that applies to like a Section 230 problem of being a publisher versus a platform, and how you can't hold the platform responsible for the actions of the users? Is that or if Section 230 were to go away, do you think that would change?
I think it would change it significantly, right?
Okay.
And I just, this is where it's just the more people in the culture and the industry we can have controlling our own destiny around tech itself, I think the better off we are. I think if we continue to rely on the Reddits of the world, and they got some good stuff going on, right? But I think the risk is where I pay attention. I'm a big risk management person, right? It's just like, you start looking at what could happen. We don't. The people that are on that platform that are participating in goods and services or firearm discussions, there's nothing that stops that platform from disallowing that tomorrow, right? And I think that's where, to me, from a tech and an industry perspective, I get very worried that we just don't have enough of our own sites, marketplace. It's not just marketplace, right? There's plenty of forums out there. I think forums are probably the one place we do well at.
It's fragile.
Yes, but it's very fragile, right? And a lot of those sites are old, and they're tough to get into, right? After just from a new modern technology perspective. So I think the more we as an industry can start investing in supporting any sites that are owned by people within the industry, I think the better off we're going to be long term. I think that taking that control back and building our own infrastructure and ecosystem within tech is going to be critical to this industry moving forward.
I agree with you in principle, and it makes sense to me in the sense of that if I'm interpreting you correctly, it makes sense to me in saying that I want to have a website run by somebody that I trust, who will maintain decent standards for the people participating. As in, and here's kind of that ugly spoiler. I don't think when it comes to web platforms, I'm a free speech absolutist. It's not when it comes to web platforms, I definitely have my limitations. Like, and the easy ones are like kitty pornos and stuff like that. Like they just like, there are certain things that this is, and I know that there are people out there who engage in like the First Amendment conversation that are going to say, well, that's already illegal, so you cannot expect that. That's not the same thing. And I agree that there's a difference between between blocking content that is illegal in the United States from being on your webpage, than picking and choosing what can and cannot be on there. I understand there's a difference there. But when it comes to a platform, like the main aspect, I think that ties the community to a platform is trust. And trust is not trust is not a fungible concept. It's not like I have this isn't like the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind, where like your respect is 78. You can ask the question. It's not quite like that. It's not video game level reputation where you gain it in units and points. But it is a certain element of it being non-tangible, but very real. And like, and so I think that's one reason why so much of gun culture is on Instagram, because we trust Instagram enough not to be overboard with the censorship. Whereas TikTok is its own thing, or whether, YouTube, we trust YouTube enough. When gun culture loses enough trust in YouTube, they will migrate probably to Rumble or another platform, which is why we post some stuff on Rumble too. It's just not as consistent on our end. But we should probably fix that. So that non-tangible versus the tangible being, you have to build a platform. That platform takes time, money, effort, energy, emotional willpower, days at the computer. It requires the literal hard work of coming up with an idea and figuring out how to manifest it. And so for you, how do you bring that? How do you what are other ways of like that infrastructure that would make gun culture anti-fragile? What are some examples? Like, you already have TacSwap. We can get into more of like your company in specific in the next part of the conversation. But as a whole, what would you say a victory looks like? What does winning look like? Because I don't know how tech is built. I don't know the multiple layers and the complexities, just like most people have no idea how JSOC works.
Yeah, Forrest, are you asking from a tech kind of build up or infrastructure perspective, or are you looking from a community kind of win perspective? Sorry, I just want to make sure
let's start with the community win. But the kind of the question that you said is, I apologize, I made this complicated. You said that gun culture needs to migrate in such a way where it has essentially, it's protected from censorship, or it's protected from being targeted by malicious actors and whatever. What does that look like, and what does it require for something like that to actually happen?
Yeah, a lot of time and humbleness, right? Just speaking from personal experience. No, yeah, I do think it's people that I'm going to have to. You hit on it, right? You're going to have to dedicate time. You're going to have to understand the nuances of the industry. You're going to have to understand, that it's going to take some funds, right? I think this is where the barrier to entry on tech is to get started is easier. To maintain and continue to build is not, right. And to get started,
I don't know. I don't have experience.
Yeah, I can. So technology is you can develop things quicker and cheaper from the start, right? And so the cloud, right, and having access to software and free coding classes are all available for anybody, right? I mean, I can name off half dozen sites where you can go learn to code, right, with at no cost or low cost. That makes it very being a technologist is cheap. The time and energy put into a site, any site, right, and if you want to keep it up and keep up with the community and keep up with the growth is a commitment, and it's a struggle. And I think that people underappreciate kind of what it goes into something like that, right? You're always taking feedback. You're always trying to stay engaged with the communities. You're also trying on the other side to keep the site up and running, right? We spoke a little bit the other day, right? It's like tech itself retires, right? Tech itself gets old, and you have to keep it renewed and refreshed, and you have to keep using the latest stuff. And if you let it get stale, it's like stale cereal in your pantry, right? At some point it doesn't fly anymore. You got to throw it out, and you got to rebuild. And there's a constant cycle within technology that is you're never done, right? It's something that just to get into it for a second, I've learned that I've something I just don't like about software development, which is you're never done, right? It's never a finished product. It's not like rebuilding an old motorcycle, right? It's not like that. You never step back and appreciate that it's complete. It's always the next release, the next fix, the next thing that somebody's looking for on the site, the next thing that the community wants. And so, you're never done, right? And there's a certain amount of pain that you have to accept that comes along with that. And I think that's where people get lost, even before we refresh the site. You're always maintaining it. You're always making sure stuff's working. You always got to make sure that usage and license and performance and support tickets are being addressed. And you get to a point with the tech itself where the tech is out of date, right? And then you got to go through and really reevaluate. Especially from someone like TacSwap, is this worth the next investment? Right? Is the platform strong enough to invest tens of thousands of dollars in and invest hundreds and hundreds of our hours in and time away from our families? And that's a real commitment, right? Because once you start down that path, there's not a lot of going back to it, right? Unless you want to abandon it. Now, a site like TacSwap, we could have left alone, right? We could have never touched it, never done anything with it. But at some point, it's going to stop working. It doesn't just run indefinitely, right? It doesn't just run without anybody doing something to it behind the scenes. And I think that's where it's like we have to find people that are willing to make that commitment and that investment, both from a personal perspective and from a financial perspective in the industry, to start stepping into those roles, right? I fell into it, right? I was lucky and blessed enough to reach out at the right time to Paul and Joe and say, hey, I'd like to be a part of this, right? Okay. And I think I got there through them, and Paul's the idea guy. I can help on the execution and the vision kind of side. I think so. That answered part of your question, I think.
It does. I think one of the things that's been a bit more of an educational piece for me as we've been talking is that that tech has a shelf life. Like I think in a simple way, I think, well, why don't you just make it like MS DOS so that it's sure, I got to learn how to read the green lines and but that has a little bit of like allure to it. It'll never die. But the reality is you're running on online platforms. There is maintenance that needs to happen, whether that's, and like, part of why I want to be able to expand, part of this conversation is so that I understand better how your investment and your component of gun culture, what it takes, what it costs, what its time and effort and energy, what your goals are, so that as you and I are talking, I can think, oh, maybe I know somebody that is looking for a question, and I can maybe be part of that network hub. Or if somebody's listening and they're going, I know a solution to that problem, and then they can try to figure it out. Because like I am the optimist in the room when it comes to gun culture. I don't think it's going away. I think that they can censor us and they can close us off and they can shut us down. But like you look at censorship on social media right now. Dude, when people get their pages taken down, they eventually come back and they're double the size, or they're just blowing up, because it's like, hey, firearms ownership is more necessary than whatever your social media popularity is. And so we do band together. There are examples. There's always infighting. There's always little, spits and spats, but I think we just got to solve it, dude. It's a problem we can solve. So I'm thinking, okay, Mike Glover's example, right? Mike Glover gets kicked off of Shopify. He gets kicked off of Shopify. He has, funds locked up. We have issues with that. We're seeing banks and credit cards kind of play in the muddy water of I'm not a bank coding tech, so I don't know exactly what I'm looking at, but it looks suspiciously like the bank saying, that's a gun store, you can't buy stuff with our credit in that location. It looks suspiciously like that. I'm seeing things like just kind of these malicious little networky things being used to like hamper each other's growth. You run a gun page, you're going to get minimal exposure. You're going to get shadow banned. You're going to get this. You're going to get that. You're going to get whatever. Okay, fine. Like there's resistance that gun culture has to push uphill. How do we provide things for gun culture that add value to the table? I can complain all day long about YouTube and social media and whatever. And I've seen so many people try to come up with new, it's the YouTube of the gun industry. Never goes anywhere. Never goes anywhere. It's always a dying platform before it starts. It doesn't mean you don't keep trying.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask you a question about something you said just a couple minutes ago. So you and I agree. I don't think we're going away, right? But I think I'd like to see the trajectory be a lot different, right? Getting people into the industry, growing our economy from a firearms industry perspective. Do you think, and this is because you're a little younger than me, is if the internet and the Instagrams of the world weren't in place to introduce some of these firearm pages to the younger generation, would we be better or worse or about where we were at pre social media? Because a lot of this is about me. This is a lot about meeting us where our industry is at and meeting us where the audience is at, right? And I think it's another conversation about TacSwap and marketplaces and owning more tech. But in just my product background, it's like meet your audience where they're at, right? And I think I'm interested in kind of where you think we'd be without that.
So let me make sure I can answer the question correctly. But I'm going to try to repeat the question back to you. Given the state of gun culture before the internet, would the state of gun culture be in a better place, a worse place, or the same place if the internet continued its normal trajectory with the distinct subtraction of gun culture? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
Okay.
Or just generally, right? Where do you think it would have morphed as it did?
Okay, yeah, because I think of the internet as a Gutenberg revolution, a genie you can't put back in the bottle. So if the internet had never come about, I think gun culture would have been exactly where it was 30 years ago. It would have been very much so rural, hunting, family, but so much of life would be different. We wouldn't have Teslas, for example.
Sure.
So if the internet as a whole had not come around, I think we'd have to look at like a pre-communications boom age. Still communication through phone calls and fax machines, even if that worked. But you see how I'm going. Now, so there's a no change option. Then the middle one is if the internet had come about and gun culture had been distinctly subtracted from it, I do think that gun culture would have been less. It would not have grown in the same capacity as everything else going on. However, that's not a full stop. Because the third one is the bit of the genie in the bottle problem, where I don't know if I could even answer that one. It's a bit of a black swan event. But the third one being, so one, if the internet had come about and gun culture had been distinctly excluded from it, I think gun culture would be in a diminished state. I don't think it would, because so much of it being passed on to the next generation would be left to the hands of people who are statistically known for not sharing information. Unfortunately, So there's
I'm with you, and I agree, and I think that goes where my comment was about we got to meet them where they're at, right? We got to find the audience that's open to the talking and the discussions and the education, and and I think that's where I am happy that IG hasn't completely taken it off, right? You can still post pictures of firearms, you can still have those conversations, right? So that's a good thing. Mm-hmm. I still want to make sure that from an industry perspective and a macroeconomical perspective that the industry itself is making sure that we're on a trajectory of health and protection and risk aversion from a technology perspective, right? I think that's where we got to evolve, continue to evolve, and we got to breed competition, and breed better tech and get people, pull the people that are in the tech jobs into the community, and I think by when I say that by, is it, if we can get TacSwap to the point where it's a company and we can hire people, that should be a good thing, right? And I think, I would love to pull people out of those places into this community, because I think that it's overall, from a macroeconomic perspective, we are helping the industry by building a better infrastructure and a better, sustainability. Because tech's not going anywhere, right? I think we all can agree to that.
Yeah, I think you can't put it in the bottle. It's there,
right?
You can't. Yeah. You'll never be able to get rid of the internet because it's something that people can produce now. you'll never be able to go to a time before electricity because spinny thingy and copper wiry thingy produce the water thing. You know what I mean? Like
Yep.
it's too basic. This idea that we're going to nuke ourselves back to the Stone Age is like, no, we're just going to have all the same tech and no people and infrastructure, but we'll figure it out. So let's take this take a moment then to use this as a comment. You said that we want TacSwap to become a company. You said something like that, and I was like, wait a minute. I thought you guys already had like an office building, and you were like, big and like this is it's like I'm gonna make a compliment amidst the controversy. Like I completely thought TacSwap was like you had an office building with a logo somewhere, and you were like, building this tech piece. Until I called you and like, oh, it's like 3 dudes in the internet. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I mean, Paul's still very much. We text Paul, we keep him involved, we talk to him. He's an ambassador for the site. But Joe and I are the guys that are in this thing every day, right? And it's literally 2 of us, that have. Yeah, I won't put too much of this out, but we've spent a lot of our own money, to keep this thing up and to build it and to run it, right? And there's no other investors outside of us. So yeah, I mean, as much, I'm not going to be shy. That's what Joe and I want. We'd love for this to build a business doing this and be able to do this full time.
Yeah.
It's just not what we focused on to date, right? And I think what we've tried to do is provide the service to the community in our time outside of our, our daily lives and our young families that we have. And, this is it has been our give back. Fortunately, the community has grown, right? And I think I think we should be happy and appreciate. I'm appreciative of it, right? But I think as an overall community, we should be excited about that. With growth comes cost, right? And this is where tech. This is kind of goes back to this thing that's in tech that I'm not trying to talk down, but people just don't understand is like how tech is really charged and how you're actually billed on the back end is basically like how much you use this certain system. So the more posts that are on our site, the more messages that are on there, the more people that are logging into our site, our costs on the site go up. And so, that's a real thing for us.
So so you presented a problem is that at least in generalized terms, not specific, but in generalized terms, the population tends to not be aware of the economy behind the front. Or I'm aware of the economy on my side of the web page. I know that this is how I post things. This is how I communicate to people. This is how this is how I figured out how to and this is how I figured out how to run the marketplace. Like I said earlier, I have friends who are extremely resourceful at swapping things and knowing who to trade stuff, and they're running this and that, and they know it. I know people who are extremely resourceful when it comes to they know how to flow in the gun culture economy naturally. And then there's me, who I'm like, I like so for me, in some sense, for my own personal life, like TacSwap was the thing that helped me figure that out. So I know the user end side of the economy. I have no idea the back side of the economy. Now, how does somebody learn about that? Because you say there's cost of maintenance, so there's cost of this, and there's cost of this, and there's time and energy. But I have no idea what that is. I mean, I have an idea because we've been talking about it, but like, what is it? Is it like cost per click? Am I paying 0.001 cents every time somebody goes to your website? Am I paying the $300 a month it requires to run, or $300 a year it requires to run a Squarespace, or like what is that cost? Because
all of that, right? Yeah, I mean,
right.
It's everything, right? It's from and I'll keep it at a pretty high level, right? But you got a fee for and I'll break down the numbers, but you got a fee for image, so every time somebody uploads an image to the site, there's a cost for us for that, right?
Okay.
Every time the messaging platform, if we get based on a certain number of users using our messaging platform, there's a cost to that that's incremental the more people that are using it, right? And those things don't jump from like $10 to $25. They jump from like $400 to like $1,200 a month, right? And
okay.
Essentially, you're starting to get to where tens of thousands of dollars a month in costs because of once you hit certain levels of growth, right? And I think it goes kind of back to that. Oh well, Instagram's free and your shit looks just like Instagram, right? Why is your shit free, right? Well, you're not the product on our system, right? We don't sell your personal information and your data, and we don't have ads running all over our site, right? And that's, quite frankly, we're never going to sell data, and we're never going to sell people's personal information, because that's not who we are and what our community wants. So I think, like, how you decide to monetize and how you decide to build the business, it is up to us and up to the community. But there are certain things that we're not going to do that I think there's been a perception put out about tech, like, well, why isn't it free, right? Why don't you just drop, a lot of feedback, why don't you just do ads? Well, ads require massive financial back-end systems. They require, auditable software from a financial perspective. You have to have somebody buying and selling the advertising and reaching out to people to get them to buy ads, right? There's this whole infrastructure and ecosystem behind the tech, that, because we are two guys in a garage essentially trying to make this work, we don't have the capability to do that, right? So there's reasons we have done and haven't done things, and kind of going back to the cost structure, those costs are directly incremental, based on usage of the site and the growth of the site. So we're extremely excited and happy that the growth is there, and I'd love to see more firearms industries get that growth, right? But what you got to understand is, then those costs go up. There's an incremental cost to it all as well from the back end side. That it's a tough thing to you ask how somebody can learn about it. Go build a website. That to me,
I mean, fair.
go build your own website, right? Because we got a guy, oh, we'll go build our own. Like, you should, right? Because I think it's a humbling experience, and it gives people some of the understanding, back to the education word. It gives people that education on, this is really what it takes to put something like this together.
Yeah, I mean, I can say the one thing that I can say in common is that, like, when I started running the show of Redacted, has been an idea that's sort of been bubbling around for maybe half a decade. Like, there's a certain part of me that is straight raging against the ceiling, saying, why didn't I do this 5 years ago? Why didn't I do this 4 years ago? Why didn't I do this why didn't I do this? Why didn't I start this when I was in school? But there are costs to it. I have to pay for this. There's a certain amount of cost per uploading episode. There's a certain amount of cost for the cameras and the microphones and the pieces. Yeah, there is a cost, but like, even and so for me, it's been interesting looking at how do I continue running this show, which in one sense is a passion, but in another sense is like, in order for me to really invest in it, I almost have to put in full-time hours. Like, I cannot half cock this thing. And so I can't half bake it. I don't know how to half-ass it for that word. Right. And so, like, or you can, but you'll see it. You'll see it when it's not, you'll see it and it'll come out. There's no way around it. You can't be, as DJ Shipley says of GBR's group, it's like, you can't be a 60% SEAL. People die. This is not the SEALs, but it makes the sense of, like, I can only, at some point in time you have to say, am I full in or am I half in? So I understand that one. Now you made another statement. You said, with TacSwap, you are not the product. The user is not the product. I think gun culture does look at tech and tech censorship and say, I don't like the fact that they sell my data. And then you say, we don't sell your data. The incorrect way of interpreting that is that you're holding your user base hostage by the thing that you're not doing. Because I could say, well, I use Instagram, but it sells my data. I don't always know what that data is, but I know that they're selling it. I also know that Instagram, if I wanted to be nefarious, is a good way of finding out information about people. But then I look at TacSwap and I go, okay, you don't sell my data. Thank you. But I don't need to pay you for not selling my data. That's not how this works.
Yeah, and I think then you got to look at the commercials of it, right? Which is, how do we then survive, right? How does the industry support a site that is obviously pro Second Amendment, pro firearms industry, et cetera, right? And I think that's where we got to get people on board, right? Our responsibility from TacSwap is to provide enough value through our site, whether that's the ease of post, whether that's easily communications, site security, et cetera, right? We, Joe and I, have to find the right value to deliver for people to be able to pay X amount, right? And I think that's our responsibility to figure out what that value is, right?
Yep.
Because you'd be amazed that there's a lot of people passive on TacSwap, right? I've been surprised, right? The majority of people are just viewing stuff. They're choosing not to go on Instagram and flip through their Instagram feed or their Twitter feed, and they're flipping through Kit on TacSwap, right? And I think we have to provide enough value to charge those people because they're participating in the use of the site, and they're commercially benefiting maybe from buying something, just as well as the guy that is selling dozens and dozens of items every month, right? And I think we have to. Our responsibility absolutely is delivering value to both sides of the community, to all aspects of the community in that way. Whether that's a $10 annual fee or $2,000, whatever that number is, right? I'm just making stuff up. I don't want to scare anybody. It's just, whatever that number is.
Yeah,
we got to provide incremental that value.
Yes, and mature people will act mature, and if you want to be immature, then don't be surprised.
It's just like your podcast, right? You have to have the right guests on and provide the right content and add that value to people to listen, right? It's like that's your responsibility to your audience, where you got to keep driving those people back, and we have to do the same thing from a platform and marketplace perspective.
Yeah, there's a certain element of maybe almost an Ayn Randian perspective of I have to exist. It's not that I get to choose to or I don't get to choose to. At the size that I'm at right now, I absolutely have to respect my audience. If I disrespect my audience, the people who are listening, I cannot possibly expect them to stay. And that identifies some of the suspicion towards very, very large or celebrity level people of like, at what point in time did they stop respecting their audience? That's a really big question. And so I had a conversation with Chris Blau of 1911 Syndicate, and we were talking about gun culture and gun industry and shills. This idea of like the shill is somebody who's willing to lie about a product for monetary gain. It's not so much the issue that we have with them isn't that they received something for free or they've been paid money. It's that they have been paid money and therefore changed their opinion or changed what they're going to state about a thing because of circumstances external to what's appropriate. In other words, I send you a gun and I send you a check for $10,000 and I don't say it, but I wink, wink, expect you to give me a kind word. That's being a shill. Sure, fine. We don't have an issue with the money being exchanged. We have an issue with the money being exchanged for dishonesty. So when it comes to a website like yours and something that TacSwap functions, the issue that I think because it has to be a two-sided line, the issue is I want to make sure that the value being provided is worth the cost of entry, but also that I can trust you as a website to be performing good stewardship with the time and the energy and the money that I'm putting into you. In the same way that I have to respect my audience and expect them to think and believe and understand that they are a thinking audience, that they're interested in articulate ideas, not just sound bites and quips and petty drama. And so, and all of these things come together in just how I'm thinking about this in the sense of like how TacSwap would function, how our industry functions, how our culture functions, in that this level of trust tends to be the single most important element. And how do we go forward with that? Like, how do we build trust amongst one another? And how do we establish goodwill? And these are all tricky questions because they're not always easy answers. So do you have anything for that?
And I think one, I did the trust thing comes back up, right? We definitely are an industry of needing that trust, whether we're dealing with a marketplace or a review or, a product, right? I think there's absolutely that in place. I probably don't have a great answer directly from the site. I think from our perspective, it's really about providing a good service, right? And I think if people understand some of our policies around data, we don't store data, right? Like we actually, that's just not something we do. We're definitely going to be selling stuff. We're trying to help build the community up, allow people to, transact on items that they can't trust others to, to do, right? And that doesn't mean that they should trust us immediately to do it. But I think if people understand our background and our goals with the site and what we're really trying to do from a service to the community perspective, I think that starts building that trust. Then I think if we provide, a service at a reasonable fee, that people don't feel like we're taking advantage of them, and we're again adding that value versus the fees we're charging. I think if people are reasonable about it, right? There's some people that just are never going to pay, right? I think that the service was provided at no charge for a long time, and people are just kind of frustrated by having to pay. It's sometimes it's either business decisions are made sometimes based on can we charge for it and run it, or are we making a massive amount of profit, right? And we're somewhere in the middle right now where we're trying to keep this thing running. The cost got to the point where they were outpacing, or the costs were outpacing their revenue that was coming in, and that's a business decision. And I'm not going to shy away from that, because I'd rather have a community of people that are willing to chip in a little bit for what I believe is a pretty strong industry platform, and keep it running versus shutting it down, right? And I think at some point, from a business perspective, that's the option that kind of gets laid out in front of you. That's not always understood, and I get people have choice and preference on whether they're going to participate. That's up to them, right? Again, my point's always going to be, my responsibility to that is going to be providing the value back from a platform perspective that the community can thrive in.
Yeah, so like if this is going to be the only ambush I'm going to spring on you today, it's that part of the reason why I wanted to have you on the show is if I wanted to see if I could actually trust you. Like I wanted to see if you were a person who was going to be like, this is what, like being able to be upfront with what your goals are and what your objectives are. And that's that's the purpose of this conversation. So ambush complete, but we've hit our limit of advance.
Yeah, that's all right. That's all right.
But my point being said with that one is, I hope that what I've seen in gun culture is that things happen, things change, companies produce stuff, people make mistakes, people do some. We're a community of people. How do we go forward knowing that there will be we will face challenges even amongst our own ranks? And so, for you and for TacSwap, the thing that was the reason where I'm interested in hearing where you're going is like, how do you think that, how does the user communicate adding value, and how do we communicate better over the things that we need versus the things that we want, and how do we communicate? I guess I need to dial it back a little bit. We started this conversation saying that the marketplaces of gun culture are under attack. The existence of them being under attack does not justify the existence of something else itself. In fact, just because Shopify silenced Mike Glover does not justify the existence of TacSwap, nor is it a sufficient enough argument that suggests I should pay you to operate a marketplace. Rather, the value that the marketplace offers itself should be the justifying claim. So I think that's something that people use and they milk a little bit too hard. If big tech is going to censor us, pay me money so that you don't have to worry about being censored on my platform. Not sufficient. Rather, 1, big tech is not your friend. 2, we provide a service that is equal to or better than what they offer. 3, we are good stewards of your money. That is what I think is that those are the 3 things. Like, yes, there's the outside pressure, inside value, and trust. If you can have all 3 of those, more power to you. You are running a good ship, man.
Yeah, and I'll expand on that third one, right? And I think this is something that's important to me personally, and I hope is important to the industry, right? Because of all the stuff that gets flung our way from everything we've talked about to this point. It's not just about entrusting me with the funds, right? I think it's also about supporting the industry as a whole. And this isn't just me, right? Like I do my absolute best to buy, t-shirts from, like places like yourself, right? I'm going to go, I want to support the industry, right? I want people to be comfortable supporting small businesses and marketplaces and everything within the industry. I think the more we can participate and get, you're talking about buying a new iPhone every year, right? like try to reinvest in the community. Try to let's prop each other up instead of trying to tear each other down. Right. I told you the other day when we were talking a little bit, you're like, what's the point of TacSwap? Right. I'm a builder. Right. I'm not a demo guy. Right. I'm here to build something. Right. And I want it to be great. And this is a lot of what I want to leave with the industry. Right. And I think we need to, I don't want to look at it just as a monetary transaction, right? I'm going to give you this and I expect this amount of value back. I want to say, hey, I see what you're doing to try to help the industry as a whole and the service that you're providing, not just the money aspect of it, but also, hey, I'm in this industry with you. I'm with you on all these conversations and all the attacking that comes our way and the education that goes the other way. Let's help each other out. Like, let's build each other up rather than trying to argue about a fee or argue about a feature or related back to our situation. But it's really about I'm here to build something, right? I'm not here to try to tear anybody else down. I want to support the industry, and I want the industry to support us, right? And I think there's a lot of opportunity and all the stuff we've talked about. For our industry to come together and understand that better and understand that we're in this together, right? And I think there's a big opportunity within our culture and our all the people that exist in the industry to get into this together and understand hey, just because that person took money to review that product doesn't mean that they're just doing it for the money, right? Maybe they're trying to actually provide a service to the community and give it a review, right? And I think we need to come to grips with that a little bit from success, right? Being okay with other success within the industry. And it feels very much like we're always trying to find a reason to tear somebody that's successful down, or, hey, you've got a good thing going. Why would you try to ruin it in this way? And instead of, hey, I want to contribute. I want to be a part of that because I'm a part of the overall industry.
Yeah, I think some of gun culture, we go through phases a little bit. We kind of go through seasons where there's seasons of optimism and then seasons of a bit more negativity. An example of that is that usually after a big stolen valor scandal becomes public, there enters into a short period of witch hunting all of the other potential stolen valor candidates. I think that happens, and then eventually that kind of peters out. It just kind of winds down a little bit, and I understand that. There's there's another side of it too, is that sometimes the optimism and the for the boys attitude within gun culture gets a little live, laugh, love for me, where it's okay, yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna celebrate everything that's going on, but okay. However, I do have a little bit of I guess what I'm trying to say in that one is that there are seasons, and there's another element about gun culture that I've observed is that we tend to look at ourselves like we're idiots. Whether it's you're an instructor and you have imposter syndrome, or we tend to look at gun culture as if it's behind the times. And that is something that I would really like to change, is that it's not so much, I don't think that gun culture is behind the ball. I think we're ahead of the ball. I think there's a lot of things that have to do is that American society writ large tends to look at gun culture as if they're backwards and out of date. The problem that we have is that we are so smarter than everybody else that they can't even comprehend us. I'm just going to be a total dick about it. You're oh, look at those gun people. They're just my AR-15. It's dude, me owning an AR-15 and being able to quote Socrates in 6 different languages means bro, you can't even spell. And most of the people that I've encountered that are throwing stones at gun culture probably should be considered illiterate. So gun culture does tend to be a little self-deprecating, sometimes for humor, sometimes for otherwise. And I think we can kind of move forward. But all of these observations are trying to come together a little bit to say, okay, I don't want to say I completely lost it, but all of these 3 things are trying to come together to kind of make this point in regards to, I think there's optimism going forward in us trying to build systems and trying to build our own communities and build our own networks. And I do think that a lot of gun culture has its eye focused outward as how do other people look at us, instead of looking inward and saying, how can I add value? I might be jealous of Garantham's success, but wait, how can I add value to his success or or add value to gun culture? And how can we? This is something that I think is good, that people within our gun culture can take confidences that the eye of culture, the gaze of culture, is moving away from criticism of all the successes, and we're trying to slowly in degree shift towards how do we add value. Like you said, we can complain all day long about censorship, but unless we're trying to build something, that complaint goes nowhere.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm optimistic about it too, right? Just like anything else, we've had our peaks and valleys, right? We get things right, we get things wrong. Overall, I'm very excited. I think you mentioned it earlier, and you kind of how TacSwap's helped you from a night vision, like this stuff, thermals, night vision. I think that whether I like it or not, I got a couple teenage boys. Video games have really changed the conversation. I mentioned real early in the podcast, I took my neighbor out. He's like, "Hey, you got a PS90?" I'm like, "Why? Which video game? Which video game are you shooting that in?" He's like, "Oh, whatever the video game was." And I did, but it's introducing that to people that I don't think we need to figure out a way to get them actually hands on a PS90. We need to get them to the range, right? And so I'm super optimistic because I think there's opportunity. There's opportunity to build. There's opportunity to educate. We just got to go find it, right? We got to take advantage of it. I think we got to work together to stand each other up and to help each other get to to get it executed. Because I think it's one thing to talk about it, and one thing to have an idea. To have people that help you, support you, and help you really take it to the next level of a reality, from an idea to reality. That's the hard shit. That's the hard shit, right? And I think the people that are going to grind it out are the people that have good support systems, that have people like yourself that reached out to me, to say, hey, let's have a talk about this, right? And I think that's what's going to matter, right? And I think that you're right. There is a lot of optimism. I think that there's a lot of really good things on the horizon. I feel like I'm a steward of, I'm a steward of that responsibility, though, to make sure that we're doing the right thing, and we're adding the value, and we're carrying it, we're carrying it forward from a next generation perspective.
All right. Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I want to kind of lightly segue into one form of a conversation, and this is a bit of an observation. I want to see what you think about it. Is that when we look at gun culture writ large, we see a lot of different influences and opinions, trends within opinions. One of them being, as we brought up earlier, is that like gun culture is really sensitive towards what we would call a shill. Like if you get that, or another one is gun culture has no what's the word? No forgiveness, no. We do not accept stolen valor in our ranks. I don't know. There's another word. We don't have any permission. There's a word. It happens once a show. So whatever. So there's that one. There's also things like gun culture has a certain list of rules that are unwritten, that if you break those rules, you find yourselves outside of the circle. They're unwritten, but they're there. So, and one of the things that I tend to see within gun culture that causes ire and frustration is that there's a perspective of the gun culture and the gun industry which sees it as behind the times and lacking the business savvy to be as successful as other things like iPhones and car dealerships and whatever. And because of that, business people come into gun culture, buy a platform, or use their investment money to purchase their kind of stake in the game, and then think because they're a business person, they can make money through unrecognized potential. And then what ends up happening every single time is that person trips over every social faux pas until they find themselves so ostracized, they turn their nose up at gun culture and find the back door and they exit. And so this becomes a combination of the humility being there are unwritten rules to the honor culture that fits within gun culture. There are unwritten rules. No one knows how to describe them, or maybe we do, but they're things like you have to there's a certain level of how you address things like the Second Amendment or rights of the individual or individual responsibility. Like, you have to be safe, but not too safe, because if you're too safe, you're annoying. But if you're not safe, you're just as annoying. And so there are all these rules and sort of unwritten codes. But when it comes to business as a whole, part of it, on the one hand, that tends to be a negativity is that we view ourselves as not capable, not as capable as the outside world. And then the other side is that people come in trying to take advantage of gun culture. And both of those two problems tend to come together to create strife within our industry. What do you think about that, as far as, is that an accurate description? And if so, how does gun culture get out of it? And if not so, why is it wrong? I know that's a huge question. I just kind of like,
I probably failed a little bit in following a lot of the stuff. I try to remain drama free. I've got enough stuff going on. I try to stay out of a lot of the drama from from that stuff. I've seen it. I've heard it, right? I know. I won't call out a couple companies that I know that stuff's happened to over the years, but I think. I guess from my perspective, I'm definitely a business person, right? I've built companies. I've been a part of successful companies. I come from obviously a technology world, right? And I've been blessed to be able to do that from where I grew up and how I grew up, and we won't go into that. But I think entering, there is absolutely expectation of hold on, you're not from within the industry, and you're just trying to make a buck off of the industry, right? And I think I've definitely seen that, right? And I probably haven't seen as much of the aftermath, because that's just not stuff I choose to participate in personally. But I also would say, I think if somebody comes in and adds a value and participates in the community and builds that trust, and I think that's a word you've come back to a couple of times, and I'll come back to, is and wants to participate, I don't think that you should push them away. And that's not because I've been in the industry and part of the gun community since I was tiny, right? But I think it kind of goes back to, like, we need to be okay with other people's success, right? And I think because if it's done the right way, if we can build up the industry through other success, then we have to get comfortable with that. If I'm not hitting the point for it, it's okay. You can stop me, and we can redirect my answer. But
it is a subject that I want to talk about. It's just a subject that like I can see in events. Like when we think about gun culture, we think about a capitalist marketplace. But when we see other people's success, we become communists and think, I should get my cut of the pie. Or, they're only trying to serve rich interests or something. Like,
right.
I can see that. I can see effects of that play out in gun culture, where there is a certain aspect of gun culture which throws a literal conniption fit every time something is released that doesn't have them in mind. And it's like, hey, dude, this was made for a different audience. And you're like, oh, it's so dumb. And it's like, okay, I'm not interested in your opinion about the subject, but okay, moving on. Right. So there are pitfalls. I'm not saying there aren't pitfalls, and there aren't issues where, like, there are elements within gun culture which throw a fit every time they don't get their way. I understand that. But they also are matched with, that issue is also matched with or paired against people who take advantage of the needs and desires of gun culture. So that are germane or whatever to that, like the need for acceptance by my club, the need for celebrity by my time, the need for that. I understand it. But that's human nature. Like, you're going to have to sift through that. You can't, like, throw the baby out with the bathwater every time.
Right.
We're going to run out of kids. When you say, so when we're looking at other people's success, yes. I think what we want to say is that when we see somebody successful, we want to have confidence that their success was earned and is genuine. What we don't want to see is that somebody gets unearned success for selling something. Like selling something like selling the family jewels, or like An example that I would say is that, oh, look at this website that's all gun culture centric, but you know how they're keeping the bank flowing? They're selling all that information to the ETF.
There you go.
That
Yeah.
would be a direct, like, you're not successful, you're a sellout. Okay. What
Yeah.
about
I
gun
think people that put in
culture?
that time, yeah. I mean, I think people that put in the time and the struggle, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I think people, I know, from our site, we've got a lot of people that are very happy with where we're going, right, and what we've done. And I think you get a lot of feedback. I think the I don't know, the trolls, the minority voices that are loud, however you want to describe that crowd. They're very loud, right? And they've got platforms like Instagram and every Twitter, whatever they're using, right, to just to make that a very loud statement.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I believe if you put that time in, and I believe in, I know what Joe and I are working on, right? I know how much time we're putting
Yes.
in. I know what we focus on, and what we care about, which is the community, right? We're trying to provide more value, right? I keep saying that, but that's what our focus is, and
Mm-hmm.
I think I think the mass, I think the masses, the vast majority of our community see it and understand it, and it's while some of the pushback, the feedback, that's hard, right? Because the time and energy and the sacrifices that you make to do things
Mm-hmm.
don't get recognized necessarily. Um, I think when you really listen and you really dive in and you really start getting to some of the community directly, it's good, right? They get it, right? And I think that they see it, that they see there, they see that people, this isn't a 200 person company. We're pushing out, all the data on the back end and selling all of it. We're, pocketing, $100 million or whatever the number is, right? To,
Sure.
that's not what this is, right? I think there's real people in the industry that understand that.
Yeah,
And I
and
think
like
that,
I can even think of it in my sense, like your us having this conversation is going to establish some sense of trust between you and I and your company and I. Because I've already told you that your company has been very beneficial. TacSwap has been beneficial to my personal life. And I can say that you and I having this conversation is going to establish a certain level of trust in how you're going forward with it. But there's another part of me that says, in all reasonability and all rationality, that is also going to be measured over time. In 2 years'
yep,
time, if you turn around and you do something completely different, that's just how it works. Like
yep,
that is the rule of the jungle, dude. You cannot live in this world and not have risk. And
that's
so
right.
like time will tell, and I'm here for the ride. So
Yeah.
that's
And I appreciate that, right? And I think, yeah, I mean, listen, it's again, we kind of goes back to that software, right? Nothing's perfect. It's never done. It's always evolving.
mm-hmm.
We're always going to be maintaining it, and we're in this for the long haul, right? I mean, it's we when you do a launch like we did, the next couple of weeks are going to be tough. It's just that's part. I think anybody that's been in product software releases, they know that it's not an easy thing to deal with, right? But it's not like we're given up, right? We still believe that there's a ton of value there. We still believe that we are providing a really important um, platform for the community, right? And it's not just about buying and selling and trading goods. Like you talk to the guys, there's a lot of people that have made really good friends on there. Like I've met a lot of people on there that I tell there's a lot of guys that have my cell phone number, right? I mean, we text, we keep in touch. We've met up at a couple places, different training, places. That's the community, right? And I think that you can see the stuff for sale. I think it's a great service. Just we are able to provide a marketplace for people to transact, right? To buy and sell, primarily use goods. Keep the cost down for some people that want to try some stuff out in an industry that stuff's expensive just to try out, right?
Yes, very much so.
This gear is not cheap stuff, right? So
Yes.
you buy something on our site, and if you don't like it, the chances are you can turn around and sell it for the same thing you bought it for, right? And
Yeah.
we're trying to create that community and marketplace for people to continue to do that stuff, right? Because there's a lot of products out there and a lot of companies, I think, that get introduced to the site that people may
Mm-hmm.
not know about, right? I've run across gear that I didn't know existed on the site, right? I've run across some stuff that I was just like, holy cow, like, man, didn't expect to
Mm-hmm.
see that on here.
So
So
yeah.
I think that's where the community's evolved, right? Is like-minded people looking at like-minded stuff, taking time to educate each other, asking questions about stuff that they see, meeting up offline, following each other on Instagram. I think that whole ecosystem and infrastructure, around the site's really what the community is, right? When we talk about that, it's not just about buying and selling and trading stuff. I think that's where people get into it, and that's what people come back for, to kind of swipe the gear and swipe the feed. But it's really the people. It's really the people, messaging, communicating, commenting behind the scenes. That's really what the site is.
Yeah, there's two sides to there's two sides to TacSwap. There's the tech side that we don't see, and then the people side that build it. Like the community that functions on TacSwap would not exist if the website wasn't there. The website itself wouldn't be what it is if it wasn't for the community that's on it. And it's a testimony to the trust that's put into into the community that you've been somewhat responsible for, that people are willing to buy and sell $12,000 sets of night vision on there. Like, that's a testimony. That's a comment that, like, would you be willing to do that on Craigslist? Probably not, kind of thing,
yeah.
Right? So that's a good, it's something, a good point to remember, that, like, you have produced something that is a part of gun culture that has been useful. I think when I saw the shift, you and I were talking earlier, and thankfully, you and I had a conversation earlier, and this is sort of like a full disclosure to those who are listening. The intent of having a conversation with you, Adam, was I knew this event was going on. I knew that there was a bit of a controversy in its own right about kind of what's going on with TacSwap, but I wanted to try something new in the sense of the controversy is just a controversy. Fine, it doesn't matter. What I wanted to do is I wanted to actually have a conversation with you in the sense of, like, the thing that I hate is that when something happens, we all kind of isolate into our little camps and bicker at each other, and it does no good. And the thing that happened when the shift happened, you mentioned something in our call where you said you were excited to launch all these new features, but instead the response was not what you expected. And for me, the response that I had when I saw everything shift was, oh no, this thing that I love might be going away. I think that's the visceral reaction I had, was like, this very useful platform might be going away and I'll never be able to use it again.
And I think I addressed it. I had a pretty heartfelt message on Monday, right? We had a long weekend trying to get things fixed, cleaned up, address some of the issues that were out there, and trying to address that feedback, right? And I think for I'll speak for myself. I think Joe's pretty close to this himself, right? We've spent a year of trying to just redesign the website, and to take a step even back just a little further, like, we realized probably 2 years ago we were hitting some significant limits. This goes back to the tech conversation. It's all married together, but we had some pretty significant limits to the tech we were using from the past platform. Many people that were on there, our top users, were having a lot of problems with messaging. Yep. They were hitting limits. It stopped the messaging from working. It started to create a really bad experience, right? And I think when Joe and I peeled that onion back a couple years ago and really started to look at what was next for TacSwap, we realized that we had to do a refresh, kind of top to bottom, and able to really do what we wanted to do with the site long term. Okay. So you start peeling that back down. So let's go back a year now. So we've done that investigation. We've said, hey, we've got to, there's some real significant investment we've got to make from a technology and a capital perspective. A year ago, we started redesigning the site. We started looking at the messaging. Can we just plug this messaging system in? And the thing with tech is, it's funny. It's kind of hard. This is where, I can't explain a lot of it, to be honest with you. I've been doing this for a long time. That's just tech as in nature. But like, you can't just take a new modern messaging system and plug it into our old platform. It's just not that easy, right? If you do that, you're only buying yourself a little bit of time, and you're creating more what they call technical debt for ourselves later on to deal with, or the platform becomes unstable. We have performance problems because we're mixing some old tech with some new tech. It's just a lot, right? And so we sat down and said, let's get the site rebuilt essentially to the way we want to move forward with it, right? And we think we can provide a better experience through some improved pages, improved user flows. Messaging system needs to be updated, and then adding the new tech allows us to really springboard into the next stuff we want to do, right? So, we started that journey last December, redesigned the site at the beginning of the year. Joe's been fingers on keyboards for the last 8 months. I've been testing. we get so, my point is we get so close to this, right? We all we do is we're getting excited, right? And we lost track of what we really the outreach and the updates to the community. Like people knew there were some things going on, people were expecting some enhancements. We missed the boat on the overall. Hey, here's what's really coming, right? And I think we got so close to it, so excited. I was looking for that surprising delight. Like, hey, not only are we giving you a new messaging system, a modern chat application, but we got a bunch of new stuff coming as well, right? And I think it's a normal thing. I won't make an excuse, but we have day jobs, right? This is not the only thing that we're doing. So I'm not sitting down thinking about, I got a communication strategy and I got to message this people at these time, and that's not where I was at. And I admit it, it's a failure on my part. I made that statement on Monday. I learned from it, right? I mean, I know what to do now. But I think, we got so close to it and so excited that we were so passionate about providing something new and updated to the community that we didn't involve the right people at the right time and at the right place from a communications perspective to say, hey, there's a whole new experience coming and we think you're going to like it. I think it's that change. It's we as humans don't deal well with change, right? And so I think people thought what was working well before wasn't behind the scenes, and it was a lot of us keeping the thing running and a lot of more support and maintenance. People didn't see that because it wasn't affecting every person on the platform. And we knew it, so we were doing something about that in the background to hopefully make this thing better for the long haul, right? And I think we're there now, right? I'm not saying it's perfect. I know it ain't perfect. We're still working on stuff. That's software. I hope everybody gives us an opportunity to continue to work on it. I think when we launched in 2020, Joe and I were talking about this. It was like, it was about a month or two before we really kind of got everything kind of cleaned up, really stable, working great. All those little features back into the platform that you kind of launch without a few things because it's just not critical to the operations of the site. We made a mistake in keeping everybody up to speed on what the changes were coming. I got excited. We got too close to what we were doing ourselves. We put out more than we should have from a change management perspective. But I think if everybody sticks with it, I think the heart and soul of the site is still there, right? You still post, trade, etc. Messaging is, the amount of messaging that goes to our platform is insane. It's like people that are
messaging platform is struggling for sure.
Yeah, and it's like, so I think once we can get people that trust back in the site stability and the features and the workflows. I think if people give us a chance, and I hope they do, because understanding kind of what we're trying to do and what we want to mean to the community. You give us a little time, that stuff will be back. That trust and the stability and the little bugs that we're working on right now, that stuff will be worked out. We're working endless hours on it just so everybody knows. So it's not like we hit update and then we took off on vacation. So
well, there's you made a statement earlier in that. About how you failed to like communicate well or something along the lines of whatever. And I think this is going to be, I will play the role of the apologist and say there's a very big difference between a communication failure and like an ethics failure. There's a huge difference between somebody working on a platform and releasing something like let's make a series of assumptions, right? These are abstract concepts, but if somebody thought that the price that you were asking was unjustified and high, I might find frustration in it, but that is something very different than you lying about your service. That is not a stolen valor problem. This is not right. So like, and although we do as human beings partition between different sorts of crimes and offenses, and we have our own ways of doing that, I understand that. If we were like, we do need to be aware that even if there was an offense taken in how you that you didn't communicate well, like it's a tactical failure. Fine, if you want to use that language, but it's very, very, very different than the moral failure of lying about something, about selling somebody's information behind their back, about whatever a stolen valor. And those two things, we can separate those. I think that my gut reaction to how the change came out was I was concerned that something that I liked was going away. Something that I found a lot of use in. Now, And so now as we're going forward, given the anti-fragile nature of gun culture, if it turns out the case that everything that you're saying to me is a lie today, I can say in good confidence that somebody will come in and take your place and figure it out. Don't want that to happen, but fine. I can say that with confidence. So with that going into the kind of the future of both tech and TacSwap and gun culture, do you have aspirations for TacSwap to be more than just a marketplace? Or what are ways that you think people within gun culture, as they're growing and maturing, could address problems, challenges, obstacles for our culture as a whole in a way that would be profitable for them? I don't expect people to work for free. If you're going to invest 40, 60 hours a week in producing something, I expect you to make something out of it. Right?
And one, I appreciate that, and I think it's important, right? Because while we're not a company today, I'm not going to hide behind the fact that, and I think I said earlier, Joe and I would love to do this full time, right? And I think if we can build this and we can support the industry and keep the heart and soul of what TacSwap is today, which is a consumer to consumer marketplace, right? And really keep growing the business based on that. That's what TacSwap should remain. Now, with that being said, there's also a big opportunity in the market, and this goes back to supporting the industry in a bigger way, right? And I think because our industry does not have access to a lot of the Etsy's of the world and the eBays of the world in the way we want to, I would love to be able to have TacSwap help support some, small guys that are just starting up, right? There's literally guys on our website that have started their own businesses buying and selling gear on our site. I mean, I know those guys, right? Lewis with DBT Industries, they make patches and slaps, right? And he's got, he's trying to start his business up. He's having hard time finding ways to get his marketing materials out there that at a cost he can afford, at the audience, he's meeting his audience where it's at, right? We want to help build that up, right? I got another good friend, Eric, with Anonymous Arms. He's a scare coder, right? Just got his shop set up, right? Like, hey, how can I use your site? What's the best way to use your site to kind of, get the audience there, right? And I think there's a big opportunity for us to be stewards of those guys in the industry, to help give them profiles on our page, to help give them access to the community, right? And it's in allowing them to help build their businesses, because we have an audience, that audience, they can meet the audience where it's at, right? That they have to build up their own trust through the site, but we have a platform. We have a platform in the community available to them, right? So I can definitely see TacSwap helping out. I'm careful to say I don't want a lot of merchants on our site. I don't want, there are merchants on our site. They don't necessarily put their FFL name or their brick and mortar name on their username, but what they've done a really good job at, and I think, I've had some really good conversations with different users about this, which is like, I don't want those guys on your site. My response to that is, okay, I understand why, right? You guys want the community, a large part of the community wants this to remain a consumer to consumer, secondhand site. We don't want all the merchants overtaking this like they did on other, gun marketplaces. Okay, I get that. The merchants that have done well on TacSwap have a very, very good understanding of what our community is looking for, the products that they're looking for at the price they're looking for it at. They know that our audience is not going to pay full retail.
Yeah.
They know it, right? So what they're able to do is use their purchasing power to offer our community a pretty decent discount in a lot of spots for new gear that they can't do that in their brick and mortar shop. I think the second thing that people don't realize as they're scrolling the feed is those merchants provide a lot of content, right? And I don't want to, content is everything. Even on a website like ours, right? Like those guys provide a lot of content to the feed that if you're looking for a riser, right, a Unity riser, or one of these kind of hard to find things, these guys know that this is the audience for those products, right? They're not putting, back to they're not putting their 870 up for sale on our site. Right? That's just not, it's a waste of time for them to do that. So I think the merchants that have been able to engage with the community and been successful have figured out the market that we serve itself. And I think that I think that we deserve to give them a little bit of a chance to, not pollute the site with their branding and their 870s of the world. And also give them some credit for bringing some content and some product to the site that's some hard to find shit sometimes that get dropped on the site that people, I've got people directly say, that's why I come, because you guys got there's people that post hard to find stuff on your site.
Yeah, there's one thing that is absolutely a testament to at TacSwap is that if I want to find something that's not easily available, I'm going there. Yeah. It's just straightforward. That is the first place. If I'm looking for something, like if I think of right now, I have personal contacts at Sig Sauer, but if I wanted to go to buy a Sig MCX LT Spear, the new one, I would probably check TacSwap before I called Sig, but that's neither here nor there. But so I'm just going to even communicate my personal thoughts on it. So this is not a reflection of gun culture as a whole, but yes, one thing that I am as absurd as it is I am adverse to there being merchants on the website. What I'm saying that one is if I want to know that I'm purchasing from a person who has it. I don't want to be purchasing from a wholesaler, or I don't want to be purchasing a pre-owned item from a gun store. Why? I have no idea, because the price is the price and the shipping is the shipping. But one thing that I don't like to see is if I open the feed and I've got 30 pictures from the same guy and they're all like, oh, this is Joe Bob LLC, and then like blah, 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 and it's just this gun safe. And it's like, oh man, I don't want to see it. So it's almost like an aesthetic thing. Is there any justification behind it? Yes, I think there is. Is that part of the magic of a user-to-user sales system is that I can barter with you. It's really hard to barter with a gun store. So what other websites have done is they've had you have the option of clicking a tab or clicking a box to filter out stores versus users. I don't think that goes far enough. I think you should have a dedicated page to public marketplace. Hey, I'm running this as a business. That's how I do it. And a secondary one for specifically garage sale items or, pre-owned kind of things. And if the community will intentionally partition that way, I think that would solve the problem right there. Because then I know that when I'm going for a pre-owned item, I can go over to this pool. And if I'm just looking for whoever is selling the thing, I can go over here. And that works with guns, but it doesn't work as well with risers. And it's just we have to sort this out, and we're going to do it one way or another. That's how I think about it.
Yeah, well, good live feedback, right? And that's I don't, if everybody that sticks around, I think you'll see a lot of that in the future, right? I think me personally, I would love to be able to have a site where I could go in and search for, Unity riser, and it gives me every option, whether it's a used one directly from a consumer that's marred up and salty, and I can buy it at a discount price, or if I want a brand new shiny one because I'm posting Instagram pictures with it, right? Like I don't want to have to, Google 40 different, local gun shops trying to find that thing, right? So I think there's value in having, somewhat of a aggregate level of information, of that content. Mm-hmm. But to respond to that further, the soul and spirit of the feed needs to be secondhand marketplace, firearms related accessories, right? Yeah. And I think that's where that's us, right? That's the soul of what TacSwap is. But I do also think that there's some opportunity to start mixing some of that other stuff in there, just to give people the option, right? Give people the opportunity. Like if they're working, if they're looking for that, and they've been looking for it for a long time, and they have to buy it at retail, it's available, right? I don't want to. Yeah, I don't want to bastardize the feed with all of it. So I think that the merchant versus individual is an absolute obvious way we can solve it in tech, and I think that's what you'll see us move more and more towards.
Well, the other way I'm thinking about it too is like, what is it that it's not the ability to buy a thing that really affects me. I'm not thinking about it from when I'm not thinking about how do I want to grow a business and how do I want to do this. The allure of TacSwap was never the fact that it was not only the fact that I could find rare items, is that I could sell things. And I think if you can crack that code, I think that will really, if you can, and that's going to be part social code, which is going to be invisible and ambiguous. Fine, figure it out.
Yep.
But the other part is going to be the tech side of it. And the challenge that I think we run into with I think this might be this is like a pseudoscience. It's not, but it's that the mental aspect of me buying and selling on TacSwap is that I know I can barter with people. Whereas if I'm engaging with a store, I know that I can't. There's just no negotiation of price. So I can't be like, okay, so you have, I'm looking for, I'm looking for a D-ball D2. Okay, well, hey, I've got this optic that or an example would be like, I'm looking to buy a bolt action, but I've got this optic that I never use. And this guy's selling one or maybe be interested in trading. I know that a person might be interested in a trade. They will say otherwise if they're not. But I know that a gun store will probably not be interested in a trade because their primary concern is just overall profit. So if I can partition those two, because it's for me, it's just as much about making money or making a trade as it is being able to buy something. And I think that is the spirit that TacSwap facilitated for so long. Of knowing that I can it's not necessarily make money, like make a business, but at least I have a tangible ability to engage in commerce and not have to be like, I am blah, blah, blah. Or how do I say that? It's the closest thing to the video game marketplace that I can think of. Why do we love video games? They give us rules and simple goals, and they have a framework. Because I can go to merchant, and I can be like, sell for 3 gold, buy for 7 gold, blah 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 blah, and I can do both the buying and selling. Whereas in modern American commerce, it seems like all you can do is buy, and sometimes I'm looking for ways to add value, and adding value in a way that also helps me grow as a company and as an individual and as a skill set. And so yeah, gun culture can figure out better ways to make money. And one of the ways is TacSwap was like, hey, you know what? I may not be running a business off of it, but it helps me fund my hobby.
Yeah, and that's the goal. Is we want to provide a service at a rate where the guy that still needs some beer money on the weekend can get grab his beer money through selling something, right? Or to swap out a stock, right? That they didn't like that's been sitting in, or an optic, right? To use your example. That's not going away. If that goes away, I don't think TacSwap will be around long, right? Which means I won't be around long, and I don't think that there's anything on our roadmap that changes that heart and soul of the site itself. I think we can do a better job of presenting images and data, communications, etc., which is what I think we've tried to do in this last release. Mm-hmm. That what you just described is what TacSwap is, and I don't see that going anywhere anytime soon.
Yeah, and so I think we can start to kind of wrap up this conversation in the sense of the goal that I wanted to accomplish was where the tech side of the problems meet the social side of the problems. And while the tech side can be very impersonal and very rigid, mathematics is not a debatable subject in many regards. There are costs and expenses in coding and things that there has to be an infrastructure. The social side of it can very quickly get lost in the morass of, more ass, in the black malaise of just like depression, doubt, and frustration. And instead, it's like, hey, I'm not your cheerleader, but I'll figure something out, man. Let's do this.
Yep.
So this going forward, like I just scrolled over real quick, and it's like, okay, so I've got a new message on TacSwap. Somebody's asking to look at something that I put up there. So it's cool testimony, right? So going forward, for those of us who didn't see your statements and are like, I'm not asking you to do a PR stunt. I'm not asking you to play a game of like, oh, this is TacSwap the corporation. It's just like, what are ways that? Oh, I lost you for a second. Do I got you?
Bluetooth kit out. Can you still hear me?
Give me a second. We have. Oh no, we have echoing. So this is what's going to happen. I'm going to pause the recording. All right, for those of you who are still listening, the elevator music was so that we could scheme about taking over the world in your wallet. But in reality, his headphones died, and unfortunately, platforms like this don't let us trigger echo cancellation mid-record. So, Adam, we're kind of in the closing minutes of this show. We've been going on for 2 hours. We've had a lot of things to talk about. And I really do have to thank you for sort of taking a risk in coming on the public side of this. And then I appreciate that you and I didn't turn this into kind of a gotcha debate over whether or not it's justified and people throwing trolling arguments. So thank you for being able to do that. And thank you for kind of coming on the show here. When we're going forward with, as gun culture kind of rolls forward, we're rolling into the new year. Are there things that are there like windows into the future of TacSwap that you can give to people, or is it just going to be jump on the ride, dude? We're going to try to figure it out.
Oh, no. I mean, it's we have a roadmap, right? I mean, we know what we're trying to get done in the next year. We try to, it's, my experience says don't go out much more than that because too much changes.
Okay.
I think, just to lay it out, the rest of this year is going to be, baselining, stabilizing the release that's out there. We know we launched with a few things that we took away from the old system that we had plans to get back in. Like I mentioned earlier, anytime you do this, especially on a release this size, there's going to be some issues that we got to fix, and we're on top of those. So, this year is going to be kind of, let's get everything fixed. Let's get everything stable. Let's get all the issues in the, inbox taken care of. And then in next year, there's really, two big areas, and when I break this down in a roadmap, it's like, my roadmap literally says community focus, right? And we're going to do more now because we have new tech, to get the community brought closer together on the application, right? Things like being able to at each other on the application, right? It's like, so that it fires off a notification that somebody added you, right? I know there's a lot of guys in there looking for certain things, and I, text them the link to the post, right? It's like, hey, I'll just at you on this thing. It'll notify you, bring you onto that page. SMS notifications instead of email notifications, just bringing some more of these things that are more modern back into the platform. When we went and refreshed this whole site, this is why, we're going to be able to do things like this faster. We're going to roll out some life cycle management of posts. So like a lot of guys don't manage their posts well. They post something and it goes to die. And, and 3 months later, somebody searches for it and that guy sold it on another forum or has, doesn't want to sell it anymore. So we're going to add some automation into, kind of having to manage the site manage itself a little better from a kind of a cleanup perspective. Just a lot of that, a lot more focus around the community aspect of the site itself, and giving people that more modern experience within the site to do that. I think those are the big things. I think I'm excited. I'm still excited about this release. Being able to do multiple images, giving better. I don't know. A lot of people notice our image quality. We improved the image quality a lot on the site. A lot of the feedback used to be is like, hey, it looks nice, but then if I try to dive in and scroll in or zoom into the image, it doesn't look great. So, I think we've done a lot of that stuff. I think, just focusing back on, keeping to the core of what we are, right, is making sure that we, get hashtags, a lot of personalization, at mentions. Love to introduce like private groups, right? We know that there's a big group of people on Facebook that, you mentioned a little bit earlier, right? There's, we kind of everybody kind of gets together and, forms these little groups of trust of buying and selling stuff. Right. And we want to introduce the ability to kind of message within a group on the site and say, you got a little closer trusted group of people to, communicate and buy and sell some of the higher priced items or, whatever you're buying and selling. So I think, just search improvements is something else. I think there's a big opportunity for, just continuously as the site grows, understanding the scale that we're working at, which I think is something we've lacked really bad in the past. We grew so fast over the last couple of years from the number of posts and users that search didn't keep up, filtering didn't keep up. So, I think introducing some of that stuff so you can really, hey, if you're looking for an optic, let's get you a feed of just the optics that just got posted, right? If you're trying to hone in on certain categories of things, we're going to do that. We introduce categories. The filter's not there. There's a reason for that, actually. Somebody finally asked me is because there's not enough data. There's not a big enough data set behind the scenes to actually serve up the filter. So if we would have put the filter in the day we put that up there, you would have searched for optics and nothing would have shown underneath there. Bad experience, right?
I get it. Yeah, that actually is a really clean way of doing it. I'm looking specifically for accessories today. I'm looking specifically for an optic. I'm looking for, maybe it even partitions down to like red dots or LPVOs or this, or just keeps the general pool. That's fine.
Yeah, but it keeps the experience the same too. So you filter and you still get the feed experience, right? Because I think that's that's that fresh content that people like coming to the site for. But also keeps but it also helps you start narrowing down. Listen, I don't want to look through 1,000, grips and mags and stuff. I'm just trying to look for an optic, right? But yeah, so I think we introduced the first thing. So we'll start getting the filtering set up for that kind of stuff, and make sure that there's a good experience for the community.
Do you guys have a cell phone app yet? I forgot.
We don't. So yeah, so that's a very interesting question. Again, one of these tech things that's really hard to explain to people. So we work what they call a progressive web app, and what that does is it renders our site to work on for mobile phones and websites, right? So we basically create one website that basically will change the resolution, change the look and feel of the site based on the device that you're on. We believe that we would love to have a native app. It allows you to do things like push notifications, right? There's a reason that our tech doesn't allow you to get a push notification on your phone. It's because we're not a native app. If we submitted a TacSwap app to the Apple Store or the Google Store, chances are we're not going to get it passed. The amount of again, cost, time, investment into creating a native app versus a progressive web app that we've done is just a different animal. And if we went that route, created that app, and then submitted it and it didn't get approved, that's a significant investment from Joe and I's time that we're not doing other things to support and better the value, better the community. So we've kind of said, listen, that's something we can actually do a little faster and quicker now if we want to. If we thought there was a window or an opportunity to get it passed in the Apple Store. But listen, Gunbroker did that forever ago, and they got their app pulled, right? So if we went and did that now, I personally don't see it getting passed, and I don't know that we want to. That's where we want to spend our time and energy right now, given the opportunity. I think given the other value that we can build in that time, using that time.
Yeah, so what that means is it falls. How I interpret that is the onus of responsibility falls on the culture to reach such an extent that people who work at Apple and Google would be like, okay, cool, this is a normal thing. It's not that it's our responsibility to educate everybody, but the future going forward as we continue to gain momentum in gun culture. As I don't think gun culture is a new thing. I think it's endemic. It's a component of American culture as a whole. And so I think there's optimism. I think there's room for optimism. And as we go forward, there is an equal part responsibility on those who are building tech like yourself and people like me who are focused on culture to be able to continue to work together. And that's just good. That's kind of the point, man. I really do appreciate it. So let's wrap up for now. I think we've really come to a really good stopping point, even though we're only 8 minutes after the break, huh? But thank you very much for coming on the show and having this kind of longer conversation about a topic at a time where we could very easily just live in controversy and drama. And thank you for taking the risk of coming in, having a conversation with a somewhat absolute stranger, and kind of opening up how you think this is going forward and how we can make progress. So
yeah, Forrest, I appreciate you reaching out, right? And I think anybody who has reached out to me directly and reasonably, we've talked, right? I've talked to dozens, if not hundreds, of people at this point in time about the release and about the future and what we're trying to do and why. And I think the people that come at it constructively, and want to have a conversation, I've been able to turn some of the people that were on us from the get-go, right, and have a real conversation about, hey, this is what we're about, right? This is what we're trying to do. This is no ill intent, and we're excited about what we're doing, right? And we want the feedback. And if I'm so hard-headed and defensive and I can't listen to our community and take the feedback, we may as well hang it up, right? I may as well not invest another minute in it. And it takes people like you to reach out. Once I saw what you were doing and what the forum you were providing about having the candor and some conversation around this stuff and what we need to do as a community, I'm all about it, right? I'm not hiding behind a rock. I'm not, hiding behind my email or my keyboard. I'm here, right? I'm open to any feedback and any suggestion, because Joe and I are two guys that are sitting here trying to make this work and trying to improve. And we can't do it without that, direct and honest feedback. So I appreciate the forum. I appreciate you reaching out, and I would say anybody that wants to talk, I'm more than happy to talk to them.
Yeah, well, Adam, again, thanks for coming on, and thanks for being open about that. I do think one of the better things that's coming out of gun culture, and it's just a testimony to our success going forward, is that I do see gun culture being a lot more mature in its ability to converse with each other. Like, we will always have people who play the troll. We'll always have people who are there for the drama. I know it's going to happen. It's fine. But, like, hey, dude, we're also always going to have, the elite of the elite and the best of the best, and we're always going to have second raters. So, like, it doesn't mean that this needs to all be a big ego game. I do think that I'm glad to see that you're in it for the long haul. Let's figure this out. Let's keep going forward. So,
let's build shit, right? Let's build shit, not tear shit down. That's what I'm about. So let's do that together.
I agree wholeheartedly. When it comes to ideologies, even whether it's like philosophy and deconstructionism, it's really easy to poke holes in people's economic systems or political theories. And yes, that's true. It is, and we are responsible for the holes that we find in our ideas. But it is a lot harder to build something. It's a lot easier to criticize a book than it is to write one. It's a lot easier to say this page sucks than it is to build one. It's a lot easier to complain about the release of a video game than it is to make one. So we know this, but it also is, hey, if you're going to make it, you have to do your best.
Yep,
and
that's right.
That's what we expect out of you. So, all right.
Absolutely.
So what we know, people can find you at TacSwap. We know that. But where else? Are you a social kind of a media guy? What else do we do?
You know what? I get at this at the top a little bit. I'm not. Unfortunately, I think I've worked in tech too long that there's the romance of it has worn off, right? And I know the realities of some of the stuff that goes on behind the scenes. And we could talk about that. That's probably a whole nother show, right? But I love TacSwap. I live and breathe TacSwap, and I have family. I've got other work outside of this. I'm really greedy, I guess, for lack of better terms, not about the monetization of the site, but about my time. And
yes,
I think I stick to the community I love, and that's the TacSwap community. And I spend countless hours, more hours than my wife and my kids would probably like at night on the site, communicating with people, working with Joe, because that's what my passion is, right? And it's where I would rather spend my time. I've never had a Facebook account, don't have a Twitter account, got an Instagram account that I probably haven't posted on in 4 or 5 years. So you just, it's TacSwap, right? It's like, that's my life right now. And it's something I love to do. And I'm proud to be a part of it. And I'm lucky to have people like Joe, Paul, yourself, that people that are wanting to participate in the success of it and the feedback of it. So
cool. Well, thank you again for coming on.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And then, and to the audience that's listening, thank you for listening to this conversation. Adam and I had Adam, I'm thankful that you and I got to talk about this. I really am. For those who have listened and thought this was valuable, you guys know where to find TacSwap. Many of you are going to be familiar with the website already, but then you know how to support the channel for us here. Head over to redactedllc.com. We got merch. It's closing on the 16th of December. We'll see you next year with some new stuff. So, Adam, without further ado, thank you very much, and we will talk to you soon.
Thanks, Forrest. Have a great one.